United States House repeal 2002 Iraq War Authorization. Pandemic inspires passion for banking in Los Angeles. Good evening, TV Education Timor viewers. Come back with me, Dirce Lilifania, on the Voice of America News. For deliver the latest news, sharp and reliable with the best reporter from different countries from all around the world, which we summarize in TV Education Timor. The VOA and TV Education Timor work together to deliver Voice of America News in Timor-Leste. Well, let's begin the news for today. The United States House of Representatives on Thursday to repeal nearly 2 decades-old bill giving American presidents sweeping powers to conduct war on terror. Catherine Gibson for VOA News in Washington.
Nearly 20 years since the United States went to war in Iraq, the congressional authorization allowing President George W. Bush to topple Saddam Hussein is now one step closer to ending. Since the authorization, 3 U.S. presidents from both parties have interpreted that language to engage in a broad range of conflicts.
To this day, our endless war continues, costing trillions of dollars and thousands of lives in a war that goes way beyond any scope that Congress conceived or intended.
Under the U.S. Constitution, only Congress has the authority to declare war. But in the wake of the September 11th attacks, lawmakers gave presidents broad powers to enter into conflict. That authorization for use of military force, or AUMF, ultimately weakens the U.S. military, one Iraq War veteran argues.
The longer this AUMF is on the books, the longer we in Congress are abandoning our own moral and constitutional duty to debate and to decide when to send American soldiers into harm's way.
President Trump used the 2002 AUMF to justify the 2020 airstrike, killing Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, a decision that Republicans say proves its necessity.
I also share the desire to repeal the 2002 AUMF as well as the 2001 AUMF. But that must be a part of a serious process to provide clear, updated authorities against the terrorists who still plot to kill Americans at home and abroad.
The U.S. Senate is expected to vote on that resolution shortly, where the repeal has the support of Democratic leadership.
The Iraq War has been over for nearly a decade. An authorization passed in 2002 is no longer necessary in 2021.
But it will face opposition from Republicans who argue the process has been rushed.
The grave threats posed by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups are as real as they've ever been. And repealing AUMFs without agreeing on a set of new authorities up front will only lead to more uncertainty about what we're going to do about them.
Earlier this week, the White House supported the repeal, but also called on lawmakers to pass a new framework that allows the United States to defend itself. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
For some people, COVID has led to change in lifestyle or even a new job. That's the case of bike rider in Los Angeles, California, who ended up opening several bicycle shops to meet a growing demand by people wanting to get exercise while exploring their city.
Overland to Venice.
Bike riders gather several times a week, part of an expanding group of cyclists started by Kelly Hart. Stuck at home in the pandemic, she got out her old bike.
But I pulled it out, got it repaired, and started riding, and I fell in love all over again. And then my friends wanted to come, and I'm like, come on, let's go. And more people came, and then I looked up, and I had 100 people behind me on a Tuesday night.
Many needed bicycles, which gave rise to her new bike shop.
And I took my savings, and I bought 3 of them, and I posted on my social media that I had bikes for sale, and they sold immediately.
She had a new business and more customers wanting bikes.
When the pandemic hit, I was like, all right, well, I can't go to the gym. I'm not playing basketball.
Riding offered a chance to get outdoors where things are safer. For some, it has been therapy.
I was in an accident, and so I was afraid to be around large groups. I was afraid to be in public.
Stressed by the pandemic, others say the same thing.
I feel like right with us. A lot of people say save their lives. I think it saved my life, got me active.
Safety comes first on the streets, and experienced riders warn others of problems.
We're looking out for potholes that can destroy your bike. We're also making sure that we're looking out for cars.
Most bike rides are for fun, but some make a statement. The group took part in a ride in early June to commemorate George Floyd. He died last year at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer who was convicted in April of murder. It was a mobile rally for justice, said one of the organizers, a probation officer.
Instead of the same regular march, we decided to do a bike ride and a march, and just to bring the community out and togetherness and love and just strength together.
Riding creates bonds.
That's what we are, a mobile community, a community of joy, happiness, friendship.
A community strengthened by surviving a pandemic. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA.
A group of volunteers in the Iraqi city of Sulaymaniyah is planting trees to provide a healthier environment for the local community.
Non-governmental organizations and volunteers in Sulaymaniyah have gathered here today to plant more than 1,000 trees to increase the urban green areas in the city. The Kurdistan regional government announced last year that cities in Kurdish areas are well below the global standards of setting aside at least 15 to 30% in urban green areas. Non-governmental groups are trying to change that.
Today we managed to plant a few hundred trees. We are planning to plant more than 1,000 trees when we finish the project.
This is the fourth project of tree planting that we take part in. Previously, we did the same with Gohizm Mountain, Mamayari Hill, and some other places in the city. We also do humanitarian work as well.
The goal isn't just to make things look better, but to improve the overall environment.
The urban green areas in Sulaymaniyah are decreasing. Each year, we participate in activities to protect the environment of the city. This year, we are doing it as well, and we are hoping our efforts succeeded.
There are lots of cars in this city that pollute the environment, and the green areas are too few. We are planning to increase those areas by planting trees, so it leads to cleansing the environment and having less diseases among the people. The city really needs this.
The volunteers believe that with additional green spaces in their communities, not only are they creating a healthier environment for their communities, but also helping to fight climate change. For Rebaz Majid in Sulaymaniyah, Iraq, Bejan Hamdard, VOA News.
Astronauts working outside the International Space Station prepare for prime-time power, plus NASA readings for the moon, while a United States congressman asks puzzling questions about changing its orbit.
By these new solar arrays.
This week, NASA astronaut Shane Kimbrough and French astronaut Thomas Pesquet took a power walk outside the International Space Station. It was the first in what will be a series of spacewalks to modernize the aging outpost with new solar panels. The electrical boost should come in handy this fall when paying passengers and film crews are expected to visit the ISS. The two astronauts will venture back outside Sunday to finish the job. Chinese state television broadcast these images, and while VOA cannot independently verify their content, they show the arrival this week of 3 astronauts to the Chinese space station. Named Tian or Heavenly Harmony, the station will be their home for the next 3 months. The manned mission is China's 7th to space and is the first in nearly 5 years. Meanwhile, the European Space Agency says it will launch a craft named Envision into Venus's orbit in the early 2030s. NASA will provide the radar. The announcement comes a week after NASA revealed its plans for 2 new missions to our hottest and closest neighbor in the solar system. NASA Administrator and former U.S. Senator Bill Nelson says the agency hopes to learn how Earth and Venus are both so similar and yet so different.
These 2 sister missions both aim to understand how Venus became an inferno-like world capable of melting lead at the surface.
The United States and the former Soviet Union sent multiple crafts to Venus in the early days of space exploration, with NASA performing the first successful flyby in 1962. Since then, Europe and Japan have joined the club, with Japan's craft in orbit since 2015. Venus has an uninviting, thick carbon dioxide atmosphere and is home to clouds of sulfuric acid. In other news, at a recent congressional hearing, Republican Louis Gohmert of Texas posed a novel way to address climate change to the National Forest Service's Jennifer Eberlein.
So is there anything that the National Forest Service or BLM can do to change the course of the moon's orbit or the Earth's orbit around the sun? Obviously, that would have profound effects on our climate.
I would have to follow up with you on that one, Mr. Gohmert.
Yeah.
Gohmert says his question follows the previous NASA boss telling him about slight orbital changes of bodies in the solar system. Such changes were first observed by ancient Greeks. And finally, this week, NASA released this time-lapse video of its new space launch system at the Kennedy Space Center. NASA plans to launch the SLS rocket and a crewless Orion spacecraft by year's end, with the capsule flying to the moon and back. The space agency plans to land the first woman and first non-white person on the moon by 2024. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Nigerian lawmakers are seeing a vote on a bill criminalizing ransom payment after reports that payoffs were made to resolve a series of mass kidnapping.
Paul Michelia and his wife woke up one morning in March to the frightening news that their son had been kidnapped from a forestry college in Kaduna State. Yahaya Michelia was taken along with 38 others and marched through the bush for 21 days with few stops.
If you get tired, they just kill you and continue moving. You can't just say you're tired. They waste anyhow. So no matter how tired you are, you just have to keep moving.
He was eventually released in early May. Also freed were Friday Sani's two girls, Victory and Rejoice Sani, who were among the kidnapped students. While they were held, their captors contacted school authorities to demand a $1.2 million ransom from the government.
When they told us that they don't need our parents' money, we were a bit relieved because we thought that since it's government, we will not stay long there.
But the government did not pay, and parents of the kidnapped victims negotiated a ransom. Nigerian authorities strongly oppose these ransom payments, saying it only makes the kidnappers more powerful. Now, lawmakers are to vote soon on a controversial bill introduced last month to punish those who pay ransom by up to 15 years in prison. Security expert Ebenezer Oyetakin supports the government's bill.
It's a very difficult decision, but it is a decision that is worth taking, because actually, when you pay this ransom, maybe 500 million, 800 million, you have empowered them to purchase more bazookas, AK-47. It will encourage others who will also want to venture into it.
But the parents of kidnapped victims like Friday Sani, who negotiated a ransom for their daughter's release, opposed the bill.
It is better I do it, let my children come out and be under the roof of their father, let the government arrest me, then we meet in court.
There is no how we'll fold our hand and watch our children in the bush, and then you tell us that anybody who negotiates the life of his child will be persecuted.
Armed groups seeking ransoms have increasingly been kidnapping students from northern Nigerian schools. Around 1,000 students are estimated to have been kidnapped in mass raids since December. While most have been freed, the release of those still held by captors is still hanging in the balance. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Kaduna.
President Joe Biden wrapped up a busy week on summits in Europe on Wednesday as the United States reclaimed a leadership role among the Democratic allies.
A productive meeting with allies, Biden said after a NATO summit, with America back at the table, he said after the meeting of the G7 industrial nations. Reaching agreements in a separate summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin for future talks on arms control and cybersecurity. Biden accomplished his main goal, says one analyst, to strengthen the transatlantic alliance to address challenges.
From COVID to technology to regulation to security issues to managing the rising threat of China and Russia. I think the administration set out on some pretty broad objectives. First and foremost, to repair the damage that was wrought by the previous administration. I think they achieved that.
Biden reasserting partnerships and dealing with adversaries.
He certainly restored a workmanlike spirit to the alliance and had a good NATO summit. He certainly had a realistic summit with Vladimir Putin.
On the table in the discussions, Russian aggression against its neighbors and the plight of Putin critic Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader in a Russian prison. The U.S. and its allies want to engage with Russia, says analyst Simakovsky, where it is possible.
But also highlighting that additional Russian aggression is going to spur costs from the United States and from the NATO alliance. And President Biden was very clear that both on cyber, on destabilizing Russian actions in Ukraine, on potentially the opposition in Russia, Navalny, if he dies in prison, unfortunately, those will all raise a U.S. response.
The G7 criticized China for human rights abuses and Russia for cyber attacks and the use of chemical weapons. Biden said Russia and China will not succeed in dividing the allies. O'Hanlon says the allies wrestled with difficult trade issues, ending a long standoff over aircraft subsidies. But he adds more progress is needed.
The disagreements are still there, and there are a number that Biden could not or did not solve on this trip, including travel in the time of COVID. That's one outstanding issue where we haven't yet reached agreement. There are some other specific trade matters where there's still debates over subsidies and openness and fairness.
The G7 pledged more action on climate change, though not enough to satisfy critics, and promised 1 billion doses of COVID vaccines to lower-income countries. The analysts agree that for Biden, the trip was productive.
For the first trip as U.S. president, it's going to be historically seen as a good starting point for his foreign policy ambitions.
Missing from the talks, says analyst O'Hanlon, were broader discussions on the future of NATO, which has grown from 12 to 30 members. But he adds the meetings did reflect a growing consensus on dealing with a belligerent Russia and a rising challenger, China. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News.
The last Formula One race on the African continent was in 1993 at the Kyalami Grand Prix circuit north of Johannesburg.
Toby Venter intends to make sure that Formula One racing returns to Africa. The chief executive officer of LSM, which owns the Porsche franchise in South Africa, bought the Kyalami Circuit racetrack at auction in 2014. Venter already knew the track, first as a young spectator and then as a race car driver himself. He describes it from the driver's seat of a Porsche 911 GT3 RS.
Wonderful circuit, a driver's circuit, an old school circuit, a lot of character.
Kyalami has 4.5 kilometers of track and 16 turns, with names like the crocodiles, the cheetah, or the leopard that acknowledge the circuit's African roots. It was built in 1961, but by 2014, when Venter bought the racetrack, it was in major need of repair.
When Kyalami fell into disrepair, it was like a national treasure had gone down, and we wanted to restore it. And we think we've achieved a lot of the magic of the old Kyalami. This is the best option to have a race on the African continent right now.
The renovations were extensive because the track's conditions were so poor, says renovation manager Andrew Baldwin.
The asphalt is, 15, 20 years old, whatever it is. All the safety systems were dilapidated, the guardrails were rusting, the debris fencing was not up to scratch. But really the facility, I think we're saying, is about 90% ready in terms of being able to host a Formula One race.
Racing's current world champion, Lewis Hamilton, has spoken in favor of a Grand Prix on the African continent without specifying the destination. On the walls of Kyalami, there still is room to write more of the racetrack's history, perhaps the return of Formula One to South Africa. For Romain Chanson in Johannesburg, Carol Gunsberg, VOA News.
Uganda, Africa's largest refuge, halts its imposing restriction on movement after another spike in COVID-19 cases, and that's creating an even greater economic struggle for the vulnerable in urban areas.
Noela Kabale arrived in Uganda in 2011 from the Democratic Republic of Congo, fleeing civil strife. She settled in Kampala, but little did she know life was going to be even more difficult. While living hand to mouth, Noela got vocational hands-on training for arts and crafts and eventually formed the Refugee Entrepreneurship Association with her small savings. Noela says the group is working to overcome perceptions that refugees are beggars by producing products to help deal with the COVID-19 pandemic.
I know putting on mask is not a guarantee, but at least it's going to enable this one person to curb the spread of COVID. So our community cannot really afford to get every person could not afford to buy a pad. So we sat down, we had the material with us. Why can't you support our own community?
The Refugee Entrepreneurship Association group consists mainly of divorcees, single mothers and youths, many of whom are victims of gender-based violence. Most of the products made by these women are sold online and during functions, and that money is used to run the association. Leonie Mudumbi says life has changed since she joined the group in 2018.
Thinking about Congo and living here, mixing those thoughts would kill us. She started by counseling us, and we then started teaching ourselves how to make all the things you see here. It really helps us.
Uganda is home to about 1.5 million refugees, 92,000 of these living in urban areas. Julius Mchunguzi, communications chief in the Prime Minister's office, says over the years, refugees have become vital members of the community.
Refugees are not just in countries as a burden. Yes, they are burdened, but they have a contribution they make. And that is precisely one of the things that, one of the issues that defines the refugee policy of Uganda.
The UN High Commission for Refugees has recorded 628 coronavirus cases among refugees, with almost 200 of these cases in Kampala. 11 refugee deaths have been recorded since March 2020. While the UNHCR has stepped up support for refugees in settlements during this current second wave of the pandemic, help for urban refugees is limited, says agency official Wendy Kasuja.
Now with the second wave, we are only focusing on the most vulnerable. Not everybody, it's not blanket support anymore. So we are only looking at the most vulnerable. However, in terms of health, in terms of livelihoods, that's for whoever needs it.
Uganda is currently on a partial lockdown that ends July 19th, and the restricted inter-district travel affects many refugees and locals. But by using what little savings they have and by selling their products, Kabale and her team continue to lend a hand to fellow refugees and locals. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala, Uganda.
TV Education Timor viewers, this information at the same time concluding our meeting for today's section. I'm Dersa Lilifania on behalf of the crew on duty. Step back from your face, have a good night and see you next time.